an average Mexican worker, let's say, in some particular occupation, well, then it doesn't mean that we have to therefore get paid the same. That means we can get paid twice as much, the U.S. worker, as that worker, in order to remain competitive. All right, so it's precisely because U.S. productivity is high that our wages are higher, and that's why our workers get paid more. That's why we have a higher standard of living. All right, it's not because we have tariffs that allow us to maintain these high wages. All right, so that's one hint as to what's ultimately wrong with that view. Okay, moving along, the fourth fallacy or myth that I want to talk about is probably, it's related to what I was just mentioning, and that's that free trade destroys jobs. All right, so this is probably the single biggest objection people have, the single biggest fear. And again, economists have just spent so much time trying to show all the different reasons that this mentality is wrong. I'll just summarize some of the more popular arguments. So again, an easy way to do it is to just use a reductio ad absurdum and just say, okay, well, let's put it on the individual level. Does it help, suppose you said in your family, you say, okay, in our family we're going to have protectionism, we're going to create jobs here in our household, and so, you thought you were going to get your oil changed? No, you're not. Have your sister do it, because she needs employment. All right? Oh, okay. And then, you thought you were going to run to the supermarket and we're going to reduce our cash balances, have a trade deficit with the grocery store? I don't think so. Why don't you grow tomatoes in the backyard? Why don't we do it here at home and boost jobs for the family, right? And so, don't go buy a dress, make it here, right? If you think about it in the household level, of course, that's crazy. You'd just be reduced to utter poverty, but you'd be employed. You'd be really busy, right? There would be no shortage of work. You could find work, all right? So you wouldn't be unemployed. That would be good. But, okay, so you see the point there. And then you could expand it. It wouldn't be as absurd to do it, to have people say, okay, what about our state? Right, what if Alabama had high tariff barriers because we don't want to lose jobs to Texas, right, things like that? And people, yeah, okay. But then for some reason, once we draw that boundary around the U.S., all of a sudden it seems different. And part of it, I think, is just pure, I hate to use the term racism, or I don't know what you call it, xenophobia, just because that's such a loaded term and people throw it around a lot. But I think a lot of it really is, I don't mind losing jobs to somebody in Texas, but I don't want to lose a job to a Mexican. That would really annoy me. But it's okay, if I'm unemployed because of a guy in Florida, that doesn't bother me as much. So I think it's not so much the inconsistency in the economics. I think it's more the value system that it's okay if it's just like when you see the news from Iraq and it's like 100 people died and an American got his arm hurt. It's like, oh man, that was a bad day, okay. I should probably move on. Another way of seeing, another popular, very famous illustration of this idea of how silly it is to worry about free trade destroying jobs. Bastiat had a really famous article or a piece called "The Petition of the Candle Makers," and here, just for those of you who haven't heard it, it was a satirical piece, and he was pretending that he was representing the candle makers, the people who made candles in France, and he was writing to the French legislature, I imagine, and was saying that we had this unfair competition from this unscrupulous adversary that we can't possibly compete against. It's namely the sun, and so what we propose is that you make it illegal for people to have their blinds open during the day, that if everyone had to shut the shutters and so forth and keep things dark, then people of France would have to buy more candles, and look at all the untold benefits that would have. It would boost employment in our industry. We would spend our money on other industries. It would be a spillover effect, and everything would be great. We'd create so many jobs and so on. So you can see where he's going with that, and everyone can kind of say, okay, yeah, that would be crazy to turn down the free light from the sun. The really cheap suns. The sun doesn't earn much in wages to produce that for us. It would be crazy to turn down those cheap imports of photons in terms of domestically produced light, right? That would be dumb. And by the same token, then, if the Japanese are willing to sell us really cheap cars and it would cost us more to make the same thing here of comparable quality, well, it would be just as silly, well, not as silly, but it would be somewhat silly to turn down that because of their natural advantages. Or, it would be silly. You technically could probably grow oranges in Alaska. You could have greenhouses and so on, but they'd be very expensive. So instead of doing that, people living in Alaska should just import them from Florida or California, where there's natural advantages to growing them there. All right, so that's another typical argument that economists use. And the last one I'll mention, was actually by I think David Friedman originated it, and it's a clever little way to think about it. He said, look, the typical argument for why do we need tariffs on Japanese cars, that's a popular one, is to save jobs in Detroit, right? That there's the big three, and if we have tariffs, it'll protect jobs for Americans in Detroit. And so Friedman said, okay, that's one way to look at it, but look, there's actually two technologies for creating cars. One is you have people show up at plants in Detroit, they have steel and rubber come in and all these other things, and they churn out cars. That's one technology we have. Another technology is you have farmers in Iowa and other states, they grow corn and other types of goods like that. They put it on a boat, they send it over to Japan, a little time passes, and then the boat comes back and those crops have turned into cars. All right, and we get them that way. And so from a technological point of view, from an economic point of view, I mean, we know that's not really what's happening. It's not that they're physically turning into, it's that they're being traded for. But from a technological point of view, suppose that really were what happened. Suppose there was something magical over that literally turned the rice into cars or the corn into cars, and they came back. Well, then you